Okay, folks, this is Jason Hale, your friendly moderator again. The numbers are actually still climbing, and yet, in fairness to everyone who's already on, let's go ahead and jump in. Today's topic is exploring takeout materials with Murphs, and as a reminder, this is the second in a series of 3 webinars planned for this year on the recovery of food service packaging. I'm going to give you a quick bit of background, then we're going to talk through some technical details. In each of these webinars, we aim to share what we've learned so far and get some feedback from you, our recovery partners. That's going to be a critical part to this whole project. And to recap, the first webinar highlighted FPI's overall recovery work. And basically, that's a data-driven approach to explore opportunities and barriers for recovering more of those cups, containers, boxes, and bags. Looking ahead, we'll have one more webinar this year, and that one's going to focus on markets. But today we'll be focusing in on the MRF, that critical gateway or gatekeeper to recycling. So with that, let's dive into the technical stuff. The session, as you may have figured out, has started. You can hear us, hopefully. We cannot hear you, though, but everything's fine. That is actually the plan. Okay, your control panel, which should be to the right of your screen, allows you to change your settings in terms of your audio controls. So play around with that to get your best mix. If you have questions, wonderful, or thoughts or anything like that, like I said, we really want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A feature. Specifically toward the end of the webinar, we're going to have a big Q&A section. If you need clarification moving through, feel free to go ahead and type something in, and we'll address it as we can running through. We only have an hour, but it should be a good, solid, well-spent hour. And lastly, we are recording this session, and a recording will be available on FPI's website, likely on their stewardship page. So look for that in the very near future. And with that, let's jump on in and look at where we're going today. So first, we're going to start talking about the man behind the curtain. Who's pulling the levers on all of this work? Who is this FPI and their members, and what are their goals in this effort? I mentioned that we're focusing on the MRF. So what have we done so far with our MRF-focused work to date? I said it was a data-focused effort. Okay, well, what data have we found, and what data are we seeking, and what's that pointing to at this point? So we're going to explore all of that and tell you what we know so far. Then something that's really exciting is we're going to be talking about a Murph study, an actual nuts and bolts nationwide study that is, I'm actually not going to say too much more about that right now because I think it's an exciting preview. So you're going to hear more about it in maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, and it is just a really exciting thing. We're rolling out information here. You'll have heard it first. So that's a plug for something coming up to look forward to. And lastly, we're going to have a Murph panel. And so this is going to be a collection of experts on Murphs having a candid, non-scripted conversation about the recovery of food service packaging and how it might work in Murphs. So that's looking at the opportunities and looking at the real challenges. Again, scattered through all of this, and especially toward the end, we're going to be looking for feedback and questions from you. So please be thinking of them, and I appreciate it. Now, a little bit more about the man behind the curtain. Who is the Food Service Packaging Institute? And they are made up of the PRA and the PRG, otherwise known as the Paper Recovery Alliance and the Plastics Recovery Group. And they're working toward, as the slide indicates, recovery solutions for food service packaging. And these are, note, voluntary market-based solutions. That is the goal of the project. And the why, that's a big question. Why are they working toward these voluntary market-based solutions? And honestly, you can look at a lot of different reasons behind it, but ultimately it comes down to trying to identify reasonable ways to recover this material, to keep it from being disposed of in landfills, and that's the goal of the project in short. So with all of that background out of the way, let's look at who we're actually hearing from. Who are the real experts on the call today who are going to be sharing information? And we have Susan Robinson from Waste Management. And I'm going to pause for a minute so you get a break from me and ask Susan to give a little bio on herself and what she brings to the table today. Susan, would you jump in?
Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Perfect. So I have worked for Waste Management for about 14 years, have about 30 years, almost 30 years in the industry. I started out working for a nonprofit environmental organization in Washington State. Worked for the city of Seattle about the time the city was rolling out its first curbside recycling programs. Then I went to the private sector where I spent several years working for a large regional recycling company in the early 90s when we were rolling out a lot of different plastics recycling programs. And one of my jobs there was to help develop one of the first Murph lines to manage the material we collected in curbside programs once we added those plastic containers to those programs, as well as to broker that material, so buying and selling that material throughout from the Pacific Northwest. From there, I really have spent the last probably 15 years or so, or 15 years of that, working with municipal customers as we rolled out and created new recycling programs, created new types of recycling programs, really kind of have evolved throughout the West Coast, primarily in helping get different sorts of both organics and municipal recycling programs off the ground and expanded. About probably 3+ years ago, I moved to Waste Management's federal policy team, and my role now is to support our new technologies group as well as our recycling group. So I think that kind of fits squarely with what we're talking about today, and hopefully that background will help be able to supply some good information for this webinar today. Thank you.
Outstanding, Susan. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. That sounds like you got a good background for what we have to discuss today. Next up, we have Keith Harrison with RRS. And Keith, why don't you hum a few bars about what you bring to the table?
Sure. I'm Keith, and I'm a senior consultant with Resource Recycling Systems and the project lead behind this FPI work. So into our second year of working towards building Murph to market solutions for recovering more types of food service packaging. Most of my work for the past 8 years or so has really worked across sectors, and that's where I really like helping recovery sectors understand what their production people want them to know, helping recyclers understand, industrial level recyclers understand what their community partners wish they could know. And this is an excellent example of understanding that our recovery system is a multi-sector machine, and in order to fully engage it, you have to be ready to move different cogs in different ways, and that's really my specialty of my type of work. I've got about 14 or so years in this field, and excited to bring some of that cross-sector experience across today.
Well, I'm excited too. And next up, we have Mr. Kerry Sanford, a Murph engineer and all-around Murph guru. So, Kerry, why don't you share with us what you bring to the table?
I started out helping launch Recycle Ann Arbor as a early citywide curbside collection program, and from there moved into co-founding Resource Recycling Systems. I have worked on the development of over 30 Murphs and took about a 10-year sabbatical to develop Murph equipment. I am currently working on a number of projects with RRS in figuring out how to make Murphs work better.
All right. Well, that sounds like something that's going to play in to today's discussion as well. And last on our list, but very important, is Lynn Dyer with FPI. Lynn, why don't you share with us your background?
Thank you, Jason. I'm Lynn Dyer. I'm the president of the Food Service Packaging Institute. We are the trade association for the single-use food service packaging industry in North America. Our members include the folks that actually make your paper and plastic and aluminum, paper cups and plates and containers, you name it, as well as we also have a membership available for food service operators who are going to be using those paper, plastic, aluminum, food service packaging products. So I've actually been with FPI for 15 years, so my history and passion is food service packaging. In the last couple of years, we've really delved into a different area, and that is the stewardship area and the recovery of our food service packaging products. So what ended up happening, and on the screen here you see a pretty screenshot of our website and the stewardship page, so anytime you'd like to learn more information on food service packaging, please go to that page. And what we ended up doing within FPI a couple of years ago was actually establish a couple independent working groups to deal specifically with paper recovery and plastic recovery of food service packaging products. And that's how the PRA, Paper Recovery Alliance, and PRG, Plastics Recovery Group, were formed in 2011 and 2012. Jason, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a screenshot of, although I see a few are cut off at the bottom a little bit, but a screenshot of all the members of the PRA and or the PRG. In some cases, members are companies are members of both organizations. So that's you'll see within this group that your combination of raw material suppliers, converters, food service operators, all the way through folks like waste management at the very end of the life cycle. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So what I will do is I will turn it over to Jason, who I think is going to turn it over to Keith, but we work very closely with RRS as our main consultants on this project, and she will take it from here. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot there, Lynn, for that background piece. It's so important to understand who's doing the work and who folks are listening to. And I understand, by the way, before we continue on, that you, Lynn, and your cohort, Natha, will be at the Resource Recycling Conference next week. So if people have additional questions about FPI, PRA, PRG, or this work, they can get with you there. Is that true?
That's correct. We'll be in Louisville next week. So see everybody there.
Outstanding. Okay, thanks a lot. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Keith to jump into the next section, which is going to be what have we uncovered to date, what's our work look like, how have we structured it, and Keith, please take it away.
All right. Well, I think as Jason pointed out at the beginning of the session, this is webinar 2 out of 3, trying to create a thoughtful national discussion about expanding beyond what are commonly thought of as the traditional curbside materials. We see successful recovery of food service packaging types in several cities, Seattle, Fort Wayne, Boston. We see cups and containers and bags successfully traveling through a MRF. But this is working to break down concerns or any other barriers that may exist between that MRF to market. So we can really allow critical mass to take its rightful place in generating what we hope will be strong markets for all of these materials. So when these groups came together, as Lynn said, the interest was to get more packaging recovered. But the next question was definitely, well, how do we do that? And by exploring all of the information about generation and dispersal and disposal and how we understand consumer behavior around materials, really began to understand that much of this material, even though it's generated in many different stores, the bulk of it ends up at either the home or the place of business, which is great if you're trying to figure out how to recover it, because then it means you can access the existing recovery infrastructure. That is either composting but in what we're going to be talking about today, traditionally MRF-based. So the work right now of the project is really focusing on solving MRF-to-market solutions. So what do the end markets want to know about the type of material that's out there? What does the MRF need to know about the material that it's handling so that it can successfully get it to market? No wishful thinking, but actual recovery. Why the MRF? Well, we see more and more of the MRF growing into not just it's easy to assume that a MRF is a step in a recycling process, but we need to remember instead that it is a recovery agent. And this project does have a threefold recovery focus. Supporting compost, traditionally, or more often we see those directly through restaurant and place of consumption or home-based composting. But understanding that the MRF is growing more into the sector of potentially supporting the energy recovery, the growing energy recovery sector. Now, you've heard about plastics to oil, no doubt. But of course, the bulk of that MRF work still landing in recycling. So the focus of this work, and if you joined us for the first one, you've seen this slide before, is really making sure that we're making smart decisions to be market-driven. This is not wishful thinking. This is not dumping material on a MRF that doesn't know what to do with it next. It's really trying to make sure that, starting with the end markets backwards, we have a market-driven solution. We also want to have a systems approach. We don't want to solve piece by piece. We want to solve system by system. So in working with, we're currently working with mills to help explain to them exactly what this material is, and we'll get into that a little bit more now, later today, but on our third webinar of the series, so that we can then come back to the MRFs and explain to them that, for instance, waste management on our call today, once they fully understand the information and the outlets for this type of material, then we can work with them to engage their MRFs as in their network as they are ready. Understanding that contracts change, that technology changes, and that's probably the best time to introduce new material. So what we've been working towards is being able to have this smart discussion and using real data to build solutions around this MRF to market. So we knew if we wanted to sit down with any of our MRF partners, and to date we've spent time with Community MRF in Mecklenburg County and Rumpke MRF in Columbus, Ohio, and of course we have Waste Management as a member, and knew that we needed to be able to have some really clear solutions for them. We needed to be able to identify the targeted material. All right, when you're talking about food service packaging, what does that mean? Is it sporks, more than sporks? And we can do that. Then it'd be really good to know what sort of tonnage are we talking about. How much is out there? Okay, if that much is out there, how much is able to be recovered? We've started with a 10% recovery rate, which seems like a pretty small step forward, but it's important to remember that plastic bottles enjoy a less than 30% recovery rate right now. So we wanted to be realistic in, if we're successful, what does success look like in the beginning? So starting with a 10% recovery rate, then how much material hits that MRF floor? And then importantly, understanding if we can next understand that if it comes in the door, how does it go out the back door? What does this material need its own bale, or can it fit into existing bales? And understanding from there that if we can explain all that, and then we can get to understanding our barriers. And interestingly, we begin to find that some are perceived barriers, some are things that we need to use discussion to resolve, and then others are the technical barriers that would need either an engineering type solution or an infrastructure type solution to support.
Thank you.
So, and beginning to identify our target material, like I said, we knew that we needed to be pretty realistic about what these materials were. So food service packaging includes everything from napkins to cups, right? But can all of those things move through a MRF? So we began to work backwards of, well, what things can move through a MRF? And we pretty quickly established some MRF threshold evaluation. So we know that there are 5 key areas where the market gets very real and puts some really clear parameters back on what makes something marketable or not. And so if we think about, again, if we go back to plastic bottles, we could use a PET bottle, for example, and walk through this. We know that there needs to be plenty of end markets. Well, PET bottles, even though they have a recovery rate at less than 30%, we'd all like to see more because there's plenty of end markets, and those end markets need more recovered PET. That material has a good value. We often understood that in order for material to effectively move through a MRF, it needs to see about $100 to $200 value to offset the cost. So what about form and size? Small things have troubles in MRFs. Falling through the initial star screens. Things that don't behave like their material have trouble. For instance, if something's flat that isn't paper, can sometimes behave as though it was paper. Quality, we want to make sure that this is good stuff. We can't push bad stuff through. And capital investment. If the MRF has to build a new bunker, then that might be a break to how marketable that material is. But I thought I heard a little murmur in there. Was that Jason piping up?
Oh, geez, Keith, yeah, I was jumping in. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I'm so mousy sometimes. I just wanted to make sure that I understood from your last slide when you were talking about the 10% recovery rate. I'm assuming that's for projections. Is that right? I mean, we're not saying we're already recovering 10% of something, right?
Good clarification. No, we're not saying we're currently doing this. We knew that in order to have a good conversation about what recovery really means, we needed to have strong data. And part of that data equation that we see in front of us, this is an equation for a smart conversation. And we had to establish a projected initial recovery rate. Of course, It's got to start somewhere, and the goal is as we go along, we keep bumping that number up, but we're not seeing that yet. Correct.
Thank you.
Sure. So slide 13 here shows us that you've just got to be, well, it looks like I need to update my McAfee there. That's helpful. Sorry about that. So the slide 13 shows us that we just need to be pretty realistic about what's going on with the MRF. And we need to understand how they market so we can best figure out how our food service packaging can then be a successful participant in that recovery. So what kind of things are we talking about here? When we get down to it, 65% of the food service packaging material that's generated falls into material that is understood to be pretty recoverable, pretty marketable. We look at these and we kind of break them down into our mantra of cups, containers, boxes, and bags. Those cups being hot and cold cups of paper and plastic materials. Those containers being both fiber and resin type containers, so either clamshells or cup carriers, things that hold other things. They have a nice size so they can hopefully move through that MRF. Pizza boxes. Now I think we'll get into this with our discussion of the MRF, but that pizza box has good resin or good fiber content in it, and more we see a shift towards taking pizza boxes and then paper bags, which already are successfully moving to the MRF. So our targeted material list sees a good bulk of the blend of what we're going for, and that's reassuring because this project understands from the beginning is that there will be easier jobs to succeed or to tackle, and there will be more difficult ones. There will be ones that will take longer to overcome, and there will be short wins. And so understanding that we've got a couple of parallel paths to this work, but feeling optimistic that in my beginning with cups, containers, boxes, and bags, we're reaching 65% of what's generated. So as I said, we started putting some numbers to this equation. If this is an equation for a thoughtful discussion, then what do we need to know? Well, we just identified the target material. And when we start to think about how much of that material is out there, we know that there's about, in a city, if we assume a city size of about 250,000 people, we see about 4,700 tons of targeted material that's out there, that's generated in that area. We would expect that a 10% recovery rate would see something about 305 tons entering a MRF. And then we begin to look at how that would affect the bale ratio. I want to show you one example here. We have these for all of our materials, and I think we'll get into that in our last webinar, but this is an example of the type of information we're starting.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, jump in, Jason. Mr. Mouse?
Quick question, if you wouldn't mind going back one. I won't claim to be a whiz at math or anything.
I knew you were going to say that. I was just thinking, too. Why is 4,700 tons and 10% 300 tons? Is that what you were about to say?
That was my question. Just wanted to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, as I was saying it, I was doing the exact thing. So thanks for pointing that out.
Oh, sure. I'm sure somehow it was my fault. So, folks, I apologize. I'm not sure how I did it, but I screwed it up. So keep.
Yeah, I think, so in order to have a smart discussion, you probably need the right data, but good point. So if we go back to the composition of the material and we begin to know, here's an example of what we begin to see. So if we look at all of the paper food service packaging that's produced, we understand some important things about it. I think, if we look at this work is trying to break down barriers to recovery. The first thing that you notice here is, wow, not all of that is clay coat. Not all of that is polycoat. Less than 30% of that is polycoat. And I think the thing that people most quickly assume about all of the paper food service packaging is that anything that's there has a poly or a plastic liner to it. So a hot coffee cup has a plastic liner on the inside, most likely. A cold takeout paper cup has a plastic liner on the inside and the outside to protect against condensation. But interestingly enough, those other containers are a clay coat, and clay coat is very similar to the magazine type material that a MRF is already sending through. And then we begin to understand that, so if all of that comes in, and say, we need to know how it behaves once it comes into a MRF, but say it all hit that a mixed paper bale. That's what some people might expect might happen, that all of that material landed in a mixed paper bale. We're seeing an effect on that bale of only 3%. So 97% of it remains exactly the same, and we see a 3% change to adopt this material. That means that there's enough mixed paper moving through that MRF and getting marketed, that the balance of what's generated affects it by 3%. So that allows us to begin to look at, what is a perceived barrier? I thought it was all going to be polycoat versus a technical barrier. Which one, or technical solution? Which ones need actual those either infrastructure or technology investments to help overcome. But we still have more to learn, and that's the precursor to the exciting Murph study that Jason previewed in the beginning. And to talk about this, FPI has joined partners that you can see along the bottom of your screen: Carton Council, American Chemistry Council, NAPCOR, and Association of Post-Consumer Plastics Recyclers, to begin to answer some questions about the behavior and fate of material. This is a pretty massive project that's underway. The research is being conducted by RRS, Reclay Stewart Edge, and More Recycling, and targeting 5 MRFs in the country to really study the flow of material, and not just the existing material that's out there, but really seeding in a projected material blend, so we can see more of these not as frequently recovered materials, like many of those represented in the food service packaging blend, to study how they behave in the MRF and how they hit the bale. So one of the big questions about food service packaging, if we go back to that polycoat, is, can it be scanned by an optical scanner? Would an optical scanner be able to determine if it belongs in a polycoat bale, a grade 52 bale, or if it would end up in a mixed paper bale? In order to figure that out, you also have to see which stage of which part of the line that cup comes off. So there's a lot about the behavior inside and then the fate of the material. So this is underway with results coming later in the year, but a pretty serious, thoughtful approach into how to really know how operable this material is. All right, Jason, I'll hand it back to you now.
I appreciate it. And Keith, before we go off of this topic and into the next, first, thank you very much for all of that. And I'm especially excited about the results of that Murph study, where the rubber hits the road in terms of how the material really behaves. That's really, really good stuff. One question came in regarding the materials that we're listing as food service packaging. And looks like that question is plastic bags are not listed or mentioned when you listed off what is food service packaging. Why not?
Excellent question. Plastic bags, as we know, do have good recovery markets. There's plenty of people plenty of manufacturers that look to a recycled plastic film feedstock to make goods. Plastic lumber being the key one we always think about. Those plastic bags are best recovered in a separate recovery chain. They wreak havoc on MRFs, and we know that. So we want to be careful that just because a good market exists doesn't mean that we want to put that into to cause headache for a MRF.
Okay, good answer. Thank you for that. And actually, one more clarification question, and then we're going to dive into this panel discussion. And if you wouldn't mind just giving a couple examples of clay-coated packaging.
Sure. So I think one of the pictures we saw earlier was a French fry tray or the collapsible beverage carrier. So those would be examples of the clay-coated material. So it's sometimes not always, the naked eye can't always tell. You have to kind of poke around and peer just a little bit to understand.
Okay. Well, that's fair and good. And with that, I'm really pumped about this next section because it is just real-world, full-on, unscripted what's going on out there from Murph experts. So as we talked about at the beginning, this is a panel discussion. We've got three folks: Keith, who we've been listening to for the last few minutes, Carrie Sanford, a Murph engineer, and Susan Robinson with Waste Management. They will all be in as Murph experts on this discussion, and Lynn Dyer with FPI may have a few things to add on all this as well. Folks, I've got a list of questions, things that I think are probably of interest to you, and they're certainly of interest to me. I believe you all have questions as well, so feel free to send those questions in, and we'll try and mix up between mine and yours. So let me lead us off, but again, please start sending in your questions to Murph experts about food service packaging now, and we'll weave them in. But let's start off with food service packaging bales, folks. So the FBI team is really not expecting that the marketing of an FSP, or food service packaging bale, will come in the immediate future. And why is that? Simply sheer volume. Can you folks please speak to what sort of volume might prompt a Murph to make the next step to market a new material?
This is Kerry.
Go ahead, Kerry.
Part of the issue here is that food service packaging encompasses a number of different materials that would need to end up in different end markets. And so for the immediate future, the most likely way for food service packaging to be recycled is for various components of it to be incorporated in existing products. So for example, PET may be able to be combined with the PET bottles that are already going through the Murph.
Okay, thanks there, Kerry. And Keith or Susan or Lynn, did anybody else have any follow-ups they'd like to throw in on that?
This is Susan. I guess I'll just add to that, agreeing with it. And one of the things we talked about in relation to this particular question is there is not a particular volume that really we look for. It. There's a certain degree. It depends on the markets. These materials would be separated into separate components exactly. That's exactly as Kerry has suggested. And really we need those strong markets on the back end that are pulling that material through and have enough investment then that they're really in ups and downs, that they're interested in continuing to take a material. So if there's a particular type of material that doesn't fall into another grade, we need to make sure that there's good, strong investment in a market to be able to capture that material on an ongoing basis at the volume that we need to make that investment at the Murph upstream to separate that material.
Okay, well, thanks a lot there, Susan, for that viewpoint. You know, I think we've got a pretty thorough answer on that one at this point. And just in the interest of hitting a lot of topics, I'd like to move on. I've got one more, and then we'll go to the phone, so to speak. But many types of food service packaging, Keith had mentioned this, are already moving through Murph successfully. So those paper bags, beverage carriers, cup sleeves, egg boxes, all those seem to fall well within a mixed paper category. So Murph experts, have you seen any problems processing or marketing those particular materials?
Susan, why don't you go on that first?
I think what I'd say the challenge that we have, and Keith did a great job, I think, of setting up this discussion, is that we need to have, we're processing material to meet our end market customer. And the key for that is that we produce a separated type of system of material, and increasingly that's critical, and I think we'll probably talk about this more when we talk about the green fence. But we have to have all different grades need to be separate. The material has to be clean. It has to be dry. We can't have food on it. So the challenge in a Murph is to find a way to move material through a system and get it into the right bale to go to the right market. And if it looks like something else, we need to be careful that we're putting in systems to avoid cross-contamination of materials. So we're really, I think the challenge we have is to make sure that we're investing adequately in the systems, and we have the cost structure in place and the revenue demand on the backside in place to make sure that we can sort that material into it, whether it has a market or not, that it ends up in the right bale going to the right market in a form that our market is able to handle it so they don't receive it and then sort it and end up with a large residual on their end as well.
Yeah, Jason, I think to add to what Susan's saying is, it should be pretty clear from what we've said, but the understanding is that there's not enough material generated that matches a corresponding market to have a food service packaging bale to itself. So instead, we need to look at if we want to get started on one of these parallel paths to work, we need to look at what currently is successfully moving through a MRF and then see which of our materials can tap those. And so we look at the mixed paper bale, we look at a polycoat bale, we look at an OCC bale, we look at a PET bale, we look at a tubs and lids or polyolefin bale, a mixed plastic bale, though we see a lot of changes in what mixed plastics means. This idea of a kind of a pre-pick, all one for all, or all sorts of plastic, not really moving like it used to. But just kind of coming back to the idea that these materials need to be able to participate in a dependable recovery stream at a rate that maintains the current marketability and current quality of that pail.
Okay, well, thanks, ladies. And just to give the gentleman an opportunity to play sweep, Carrie, did you have any thoughts on it?
Sure. The mixed plastic piece of this is actually one of the bigger challenges right now because that market is more questionable than it has been in the past. And so a lot of MRFs are moving toward additional separations of plastic grades. And there's a cost in new equipment to do that, and there's also some of the grades do not have enough volume to become a bale on their own, and it's not clear where those materials are going to end up long-term yet.
Okay. Well, I think we've thoroughly explored that one, and I appreciate the answers. We've had a lot of questions come in centered on the question of contamination, basically food contamination or grease contamination, soiling of materials, and whether or not those materials can be run through a MRF and then marketed. So could you guys speak to that a little bit, I guess the problem of residue and particular to food service packaging?
Yeah, maybe I should start first with FPI's perspective on how real this issue is, and then I'd like to hear from Carrie and from Susan about, how sound that is and exactly why. We think that food service or food residual is an important thing to be concerned about in anything moving through a MRF. Just like the MRF has to, and the end markets have to deal with any sort of food residual or any sort of contaminant. Just kind of like on the composting side, the pursuit is for the food residual, and they deal with the packaging. On the recycling side, the pursuit is for the packaging, and we have to figure out how to deal with the residual. So I would first say that this is not a concern that's isolated entirely to food service packaging. We see plenty of balance of that sort of concern right now with any sort of peanut butter jar or mayonnaise jar already moving through the system. Except here we recognize that we are talking about food service packaging, and so the expectation is that there will be more. As we started in the beginning, I told you that the focus of this is really working on material coming from the home and place of business, where people are used to a current recovery. So FPI is beginning to start in, or this PRAG group is beginning to start into a study of how different is the contamination rate, food residual rate, of something that would be classified as a food service packaging versus something that would already be in there. Preliminary studies and understanding from some partner groups is that on the plastic side, that home-based material might not be that much different from the two sectors. The big question is, what about the paper side? Most of the paper that's moving through right now is not something that has a food contact, or if it is, it's something like a cereal box that the food is contained within a sleeve. So what type, is there any difference in the contamination, and to what effect is big concern? I'll also point out that, that food contamination has two different buckets of discussion. One for the type of the material that's coming out of the household, and two for the type of the material that's coming front of store. Well, you know, if you're at a fast food restaurant and you are done with your food, can you successfully put it in the right place, or will there be an increased amount of food contamination at that front of store? I think it, you know, all reason points to yes, there will be more there. Right now, the FBI project is starting on the Murph and the home because that's where the bulk of the material is. Once we have success in marketing that, then the next, you know, beast to tackle is definitely how do we create a success at front of store. But that is kind of a precursor. But I would really like to hear from Susan and from Carrie about food residuals.
Okay, Susan, do you have anything you might like to share with us on the topic?
Yeah, maybe what I could do is just start out by, or add to the discussion that, you know, food contamination has grown, I would say, in getting more attention, and it's something that, you know, we certainly pay a lot of attention to, and the markets right now pay a lot of attention to. I think we've had demand for finished product that's probably allowed more material to move through the systems than perhaps should have. And this is not a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. So I want to be really clear on that. And the markets often have been in Asia for mixed materials that have been the I guess, bale source for most of this material, and they've mostly moved to China, and that material has been completely closed. The windows have been closed for mixed bales, and mixed bales that have had food material in them. So this is an increased area of attention, of focus. It's one that we're all putting a lot of energy on right now, and I think it's going to probably require a lot of collaboration on all of our part to ensure that we create alternatives, develop alternatives for material to be able to continue to move this material through to good, healthy, sustainable markets for material that might have food contamination associated with it.
Okay, Carrie?
Sure. There's an education component that is needed here as well for the public, and as this material is added, I don't see, except in a few cities where there has been a real effort to make the public aware of how clean the material should be. I also want to throw one other piece in here, and that is that labels and other things that get stuck on packaging can also be problematic. And if there were more uniform standards in terms of adhesives to allow those to wash off of plastics or not be a contaminant in making paper, those would be a lot easier to handle as well.
You know, that's such a smooth transition, Carrie, that I can't pass it up. We've had maybe 4 or 5 questions come in from the folks at large about product design. You know, how does the role of packaging design affect marketability of material? And questions have ranged from should products be designed with Murph sortation in mind or with markets in mind, use of recycled content in mind, and as Carrie just brought up, ease of recyclability based on even adhesives in mind. So just in a whole broader question of product design, is anybody game to tackle that one or speak to it a bit?
Sure, I'd love to jump in there, and I'd say that you know, having sound recovery is a two-way street. I don't think the recovery sector should be the one to be required to be nimble enough to always have to you know, to be expected to jump in all directions at one time. That we understand that the recovery sector is able to move when there's a dependable pile of reliable, consistent stuff to be able to move on, right? As Susan was talking about what makes something marketable, well, consistency. So what makes something consistency? Is that a role for design? I think the answer is probably yes, and that's why we see so much activity in it right now. We look to the Association of Post-Consumer Plastics Recyclers, which is about to release new design for recyclability guides that allow product producers to understand how their plastic packaging, the choices they make for their plastic packaging affect how easily it's recoverable. I know that same group is working on that starting with some of the traditional materials and then working into thin wall packaging as well. We also look to the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, which has a members working group within it focused just on food service packaging, and this PRA-PRG group is in pretty good communication with that one to make sure that the projects align but don't overlap. FPI has chosen to take on the recovery part of it, knowing that there are good partners in the industry who are working on the design, and we should be all working together.
About try to kind of make that two-way street that Keith talked about, and kind of communicate from our end not only what markets look for, but what some of the characteristics need to be able to sort material effectively through our facilities. And we look at things like labels. That we have optical sorters for many types of plastics, but if there's a label on it that covers a lot of the bottle, we may not be able to tell what kind of resin it is. So we can confuse our own system and end up, basically not being able to sort the material into its appropriate bale at the end of the day. Laminates are a problem whether it's for plastic or paper. The end markets have a problem with laminates that can generally, in many cases, make that material not able to be recycled. We have a human factor is huge. Even though we have a lot of technology, those facilities rely on dozens and dozens of people to do the sorting that equipment can't. And if the person can't tell what kind of a resin type it is, what kind of a material it is, then it's very difficult to ensure that we're able to move a material through. So we kind of we actually have this push-pull all the time of recognizing that value of the packaging and how important it is to protect the material and to be able to sell the product, and at the same time try to reduce the types of resins to make the material simpler at the end of the day for our equipment and the end markets to be able to recycle that material into new products.
Okay, well, I think we've explored that one pretty well. Also, we've got a lot of questions flying in the door, and in absence of a speed round that I don't think will serve us nearly as well as these deeper dives, we're not going to get to all of them, so I'm trying to hit some of the high points. And several people have asked about PET thermoform, takeout containers and cups. So are they being handled differently than other PET thermoforms?
Other PET thermoforms or other PET? And I'll just jump in on that. There are a number of end markets that can take the thermoforms and the bottles together, but it depends on what product they are trying to make out of it. Whereas the resin may be slightly different. It won't have quite the same flow properties as the bottle resin, and so a lot of Murphs bale those two separately. But within the thermoforms, there is food packaging thermoforms and there's non-food packaging thermoforms, and there may be variations there as well, especially when you start getting into small blister packs and other things that will not flow through the Murph well. So there's a wide range of considerations here.
Okay, good.
What we understand from the FPI perspective is that there are more PET thermoforms being marketed with PET bales, and FPI understood from the very beginning that this is a multi-sector industry. We better engage our partners. And initial conversations, at least with NAPCOR, about that sort of work, and with APR2 about what's the recovery, how do we see that shift, especially with the green fence, how do we see a shift in the PET marketing for domestic capacity and for export? And do we, how does this material engage with them? The Murph study that we talked about, part of that will understand about the PET thermoform behavior in a Murph, and that will be helpful information to our end processors in trying to project what percentage of thermoforms would they possibly begin to see in a bale, in a PET bale that's mixed, is what I'd add.
One more piece on that is this is an area where the stick-on labels are a serious concern.
Okay, thanks there, Carrie and Keith. We've got 8 minutes left, folks, and if there's one thing I'm dedicated to, it's getting us out on time. I know people are really, really busy, so we're going to keep on pushing through, but hit the witching hour, we're going to end. So next up, changes in technology. Can you guys speak to what's going on inside the MRFs regarding these materials? Maybe this kind of relates to the Murph study a little bit. And how does the existing technology guide what materials could be accepted through through the Murph?
I'll start in on that. The main change that's happening is that the amount of optical sorting in MRFs, at least in the large MRFs, is increasing. It's much more challenging in a small MRF where you cannot justify that level of investment. And high-speed sorting of mixed resins is very difficult to do manually if you are sorting beyond a mixed plastic bale. Other new technologies, there's some improvements in fiber separation from the containers and fiber separation from different grades of fiber through mechanical separation. But again, until you add optical sorter to the fiber, you don't get a huge, let me start over on this. I have another question that I'm going to try to address in this at the same time on the Murph study. Part of the issue of the Murph study is that this is a fairly expensive undertaking, and we are trying to hit as broad a spectrum of materials and Murph types as we practically can. We are limited to 5 Murphs on the initial study. We hope that down the road we will be able to do more, but the challenge is that we have to seed the material into the input stream and sort everything back out on the back end, including all of the bales that have been produced by that facility, at least in a appropriate sampling rate. And so it's a huge amount of investment in time and effort.
Okay, and again, in the interest of trying to strike a balance between hitting a lot of questions and delving deeply, I think we'll move on to another one just with 6 minutes left here. And markets keep coming up from the folks out there, from our recovery partners listening in. So let's start with, just for fun, let's start with the green fence. Does anybody want to talk about changes in markets this year due to actions in China, and what materials related to our discussion today might be most affected?
I can take that on. This is Susan. I'm going to apologize. There's a spectacular thunder and lightning storm behind me, so if it sounds like gunshots, it's not. It's stunning, actually. So I think probably most folks are familiar with the green fence and the limits that have been placed on imports into China from countries across the globe. And again, I'll remind folks it's not just the United States. Folks in Europe have had at least as a big a challenge. Australia, I talked to somebody from Australia, so it's not limited to the United States by any means. And it basically is an enforcement of regulations that have already been in place, which limit prohibitives and residual contamination basically to 1.5%. It also enforces existing regulations which require all materials to be separate. So that concept we've been talking about throughout this call of mixed baled plastics no longer exists for us. That material is mostly moved into China, and we no longer have the ability to move that material. It also impacts paper. Over time, our mix of paper has really changed a lot. Kind of, you think about the volume of it, it's been curbside mix, quite frankly. frankly, and it's a single stream paper mix that is really a larger percentage of that material we're marketing, and it's a different grade of paper, and there are some regulations based on moisture that we're seeing for material moving into China as well. So I think at the end of the day, what this has done is it's caused kind of a market correction for us. I think across the globe, folks really started to, there were some bad actors that took advantage of the market demand that was happening in China for years. And I think as that that really drew attention to the need to kind of clamp down on what was happening, what was moving into the country. It was married with economic downturn from European products, where a lot of the material from China was going, finished product, as well as the softening of the Chinese market. And so you really had kind of the time being right to make this shift and to kind of correct us and force really some, I think, some reevaluation of what we're collecting and how we're collecting and how we're processing it and how we're marketing it. So I think what that means for us kind of at the end of the day in terms of this conversation is a very focused attention on the quality of material and the types of material that we collect, making sure that when we collect something, we can move it through our MRF, getting it in a clean, dry, uncontaminated fashion into a bale that's acceptable for an end market, and ensuring that we're always thinking about that end market solution as we can contemplate really every single thing that we then collect and move through those facilities. I hope that's in a nutshell. I hope I can kind of give you just a little bit of a glimpse of what's going on. And we really think this is probably not a short-term issue, but something that we'll all be seeing. We've got MRFs really across the globe that are adjusting how they do their processing, the speed, the materials, the investments. It's certainly it's changed our focus, and I think it's really causing us to produce a material that is going to be a sustainable material for sustainable markets.
Okay, and I got to say, Susan, the thunder in the background added this ominous tone that goes really well.
Very appropriate.
I really think the soundtrack in the background for that one, and I appreciate the dramatic effect.
Oh yes, very well timed. Very well timed.
And 1 minute till, with it being 1 minute till, I'm afraid to even delve into another question. I guess let me just say thank you very much to all of our speakers, to FPI, PRA, and PRG for engaging in all of this work. Most importantly, to the people who called in. We had a huge number of people and quite a jump even from our initial event. Hopefully you found it worthwhile. Hopefully we hit on most of your questions. And look forward to, in the fall, one more webinar that's going to be focused exclusively on the market. So that is what's coming next. Also look to FPI's stewardship page on their website as it's going through constant improvement. Sign into their social media because there are exciting movements going on all the time in this work. And so it is fun to get a quick tweet or Facebook update on that kind of thing. And with that, I will bid you adieu and thank you very much for this time. Have a great day, everybody.